Our next witness is Christina Bennett. She's the Communications Director of the Family Institute of Connecticut. She's been active in the pro-life movement for 15 years. She's a licensed Christian minister and has served on prayer missions at a number of locations, including Washington, Atlanta, and several overseas countries. She has a BS in Communications from Southern Connecticut State University. Ms. Bennett, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Nadler, Chairman Cohen, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the committee. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my story with you today. In 1981, my mother scheduled to abort me at Mount Sinai Hospital in Hartford, Connecticut. She was pressured by my father to abort and rejected by a mentor in her church who told her she wasn't welcome anymore because she was pregnant out of wedlock. She met with a counselor at the hospital who assured her she was making the right decision, but didn't offer counsel on available alternatives. A Black elderly janitor approached my mother after seeing her crying in the hospital hallway. She asked her if she wanted to have her baby. My mother said yes. She told her that God would give her the strength to have me. When she went to leave, my mother was called into the doctor's office, and she saw that he hadn't cleaned up the blood from the last abortion. She was disgusted and told him she wanted to keep me. He insisted that she go through with the abortion and said, "You've already paid for this." "You're just nervous." She repeated, "I want my baby." And he yelled at her, saying, "Don't leave this room." She felt his anger came from fear of losing her business and those that could possibly follow her. Yet with courage, she walked out. Children conceived less than a decade prior to my birth never experienced the threat of death through legalized abortion. It's easy for people to say, "Well, I'm glad your mother had a choice," but a statement like that devalues my existence and the reality of what that choice would have done to me. Human lives should not be weighed in the balance of whether or not they are wanted or measured in terms of circumstances or convenience. I deserved legal protection and a right to life. My mother's experience is similar to the experiences I've heard from women throughout this country, women who face the same rejection, pressure, lack of counseling, lack of support, and disgusting facility conditions. My desire to assist women and children led me to work for years at a nonprofit pregnancy resource center. And there I witnessed the power of hope and the ways in which love and practical support can strengthen women and their families. 2 years ago, I had a profound experience while visiting the National Museum of African American History. I was reminded of the ways Black Americans were denied the right to equal protection and due process, treated as property, and dehumanized because of the color of our skin. The museum memorialized the many ways Black Americans have been unjustly targeted and killed for centuries. And while I rejoice over the progress that we've made as people of color, an ache remains in my heart because of the denial of equal protection and due process to another class of people, the baby in the womb. The sacrifices my ancestors suffered to achieve the civil rights I enjoy today are not able to protect future generations because of legalized abortion. I'm burdened that the 14th Amendment, which gave us liberty, was unjustly used to invent a supposed right to destroy a human life. Sojourner Truth in her day said, "Am I not a woman?" And in mine I say, "Am I not a person?" Abortion is not a victimless act. We just can't hear the voices of those who have been silenced and discarded. Roe v. Wade rendered 60 million lives unworthy of legal protection and has led to the deaths of 20 million Black babies since 1973. In the dark history of Planned Parenthood, founder Margaret Sanger's philosophy in eugenics was recently documented by Supreme Court Justice Thomas in his concurring opinion about Fox versus Planned Parenthood. And today, an increasing number of Black Americans recognize this eugenic population control philosophy that is having a genocidal impact. 78% of Planned Parenthood surgical facilities are located in Black and Latino neighborhoods, and Black women such as Cree Irwin, Lakeisha Wilson, and Tanya Reeves have lost their lives at the hand of an abortion industry that offered them substandard medical care. Others have left by ambulance, suffered botched procedures, and been left with physical and emotional scars. And we're tired of the targeting and the lies that abortion is an answer to our challenges. As a pro-life feminist, I support bodily autonomy, but abortion impacts two bodies. I am a unique individual, and just as my heart is beating today, it was beating inside of my mother's body. I was not just a part of her body. And liberation never comes through oppressing other human beings. Roe v. Wade was built on lies that Norma McCorvey spent her entire life trying to correct. We can love both women and children and strive for a society that treats us all with the dignity we deserve. And this is true empowerment.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett.
Welcome.
Ms. Melissa Ohden is an anti-abortion activist. In 2012, she founded the Abortion Survivors Network and has previously testified before the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. She's worked as a speaker for Feminists for Life. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Cohn, Chairman Nadler, Ranking Member Johnson, members of the committee, I just want to thank you for inviting me to this hearing. As the now famous saying goes, women's rights are human rights. I'm here today to give a face and a voice to women whose rights are not just being threatened, but have been under attack for the past 46 years in our country, and are clearly being even more heavily threatened as abortion throughout all 9 months of pregnancy with no restriction are being introduced and celebrated in states like New York, Illinois, and now Nevada. Today, you've heard countless stories already about how abortion is a difficult yet necessary decision, how every woman has a fundamental right to abortion. Every story is important. Every experience deserves to be heard. However, when we hear the stories about abortion, this narrative is woefully one-sided. Our culture has been inundated with messaging in which abortion controls the narrative. Yet largely ignored in this abortion narrative that is woven so skillfully throughout our culture, behind even the words in the title of this hearing, reproductive rights, are stories buried beneath the narrative of abortion that has been sown since Roe versus Wade. Is there space for stories like mine, women who are alive today after surviving failed abortion procedures? For stories like my biological mothers who have been coerced or forced into an abortion? Do we ever create space for the stories of women who regret their abortions? The most important stories, though, are those that you will likely never hear. The stories of the little girls who will never live outside of the womb. In all of this discussion about women's rights, some lose sight of the fact that without the right to life, there are no other rights. This is the greatest human rights issue we're facing as a country. And I'm here to tell you that in August of 1977, that's when the attack on my human rights began. My biological mother, as a 19-year-old college student, had a saline infusion abortion forced upon her by her own mother, a prominent nurse in their community, with the help of her friend and colleague, the local abortionist, Dr. Kelberg. That abortion procedure involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding me in the womb. It was meant to poison and scald me to death. I soaked in that toxic salt solution over a 5-day period as they tried time and time again to induce my birth mother's labor with me. When I was finally expelled from the womb on that 5th day of the abortion procedure, my arrival into this world was not so much as a birth, but an accident, a live birth after a saline infusion abortion. My medical records actually state a saline infusion for an abortion was done, but was unsuccessful. This record is available to you to review, along with some other records that talk about how a complication of my birth mother's pregnancy was a saline infusion. Despite the arguments being made that people like me don't exist or that children aren't left to die after failed abortions, I need you to listen to the words of a nurse who I've been connected with who was there that day. I was initially laid aside after my grandmother instructed the nurses to leave me to die, and arguments ensued about whether I would be provided medical care. In the words of Nurse Jan, who received me in the NICU that day, a tall blonde nurse courageously rushed me off, shouting out, "She just kept gasping for breath." And so I couldn't just leave her there to die. My medical records state that when I was delivered alive in that abortion procedure, I suffered from severe respiratory problems, jaundice, seizures. I weighed a little less than 3 pounds. I was 2 pounds, 14 ounces, which led a neonatologist to remark in my records that I was approximately 31 weeks gestation, as opposed to the 18 to 20 weeks that the abortionist had written on my medical records. It's easy to talk about women's reproductive rights until you recognize that without first the right to life, there are no other rights. How do you reconcile my rights as a woman who survived a failed abortion with what's being discussed here today? The abortion industry talks in abstract and gray when it comes to the science of when life begins and what abortion does, but the reality is much clearer. I'm alive today because someone else's reproductive right failed to end my life, as are the 287 abortion survivors I've connected with through my work in the Abortion Survivors Network. 184 of them are female. There's something wrong when someone's right results in another person's death. There's something deeply disturbing about the reality in our world that I have a right to an abortion, but I had never the simple right to live. As you examine the so-called threat to women's reproductive rights, I would ask you to look behind the language and see stories like mine that are hidden, that might seem inconvenient or rare, and consider there's more to this discussion. And there's more to be done to protect your most vulnerable constituents and meet the needs of women and families in our communities in a way that supports lives at all stages of development and in all circumstances, not ends it.
Thank you.
One of the majority witnesses today said something that really struck me. She said, quote, "I am a human being that deserves autonomy in this country that calls itself free." Okay, but review the facts for yourself and you'll see that the indisputable scientific evidence now shows us that when a human sperm meets and fertilizes a human egg at the moment of conception, there becomes an unborn, living, genetically distinct, and biologically self-directing human being. The question is, you should ask yourself quietly, why shouldn't each of those human beings deserve autonomy in this country that calls itself free? Let me get to my questions. Ms. Bennett, thank you for being here. Your testimony is compelling, and I appreciate you included in your statement Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's concurring opinion in the Box case. I wanted to read a quick excerpt from that opinion. He said, quote, "This case highlights the fact that abortion is an act rife with the potential for eugenic manipulation. From the beginning, birth control and abortion were promoted as a means of effectuating eugenics. Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger was particularly open about the fact that birth control could be used for eugenic purposes. These arguments about the eugenic potential for birth control apply with even greater force to abortion, which can be used to target specific children with unwanted characteristics. Even after World War II, future Planned Parenthood President Alan Guttmacher and other abortion advocates endorsed abortion for eugenic reasons and promoted it as a means of controlling the population and improving its quality. A growing body of evidence suggests that eugenic goals are already being realized through abortion." Then he says this, eight decades after Margaret Sanger's, quote, Negro Project, abortion in the U.S. is also marked by a considerable racial disparity. The reported nationwide abortion ratio, the number of abortions per 1,000 live births, among black women is nearly 3.5 times the ratio for white women. Continuing to quote Justice Thomas, "And there are areas in New York City in which black children are more likely to be aborted than they are to be born alive. And they're up to 8 times more likely to be aborted than white children in the same area." The question is, why do you believe the black community is being targeted by the abortion industry?
Thank you for the question. If you look at the history of the American Birth Control League, which later became Planned Parenthood, you will see that Margaret Sanger had this pseudoscience that she believed in, eugenics philosophy, and it wasn't just her, it was also members of her board. One of her board members was named Lothrop Stoddard, and he had a book called The Rising Tide of Color Against White Supremacy, and it was all about how mixed races were growing, and that was a threat to white supremacy. And you have to ask yourself, what would a man like that, who wrote a book like that, why would he be interested in the birth control movement, particularly with targeting people of color? It was because they believed that certain people groups should prosper and grow, and that would be a betterment to society, and other groups should not. And that was seen clearly in the writings of Margaret Sanger when she talked about people of color like weeds that should be exterminated. And she also had something called the Negro Project, in which she manipulated, black ministers and people of color to go into their communities and to push birth control. Unfortunately, she also pushed sterilization. And there's women today, like an African-American friend I have, Elaine Riddick, who was sterilized in North Carolina after having one child. And she was told by doctors, "We don't want you to reproduce after your own kind." America has a dark history, and it involves racism. And now we see 78% of abortion facilities, Planned Parenthoods, are located in lower-income minority neighborhoods. There's a great resource on protecting Black life where they lay out the map of the United States, and you can go to that website and you can see the different areas that are targeted. And this is why people of color are standing up. The Church of God in Christ is the largest Black denomination in America with over 6 million members. And recently they have started a movement to stand up against the targeting of the African American community, as well as a movement of adoption, encouraging their members to adopt. I will also say that African American women being 3 times more likely to abort, it's not because we desire to have abortions more than anyone else, it's because we often feel like we don't have the resources, we don't have the support that we need. And so things do need to change. We do need help and support in these areas. People should not be pressured like my mom was. People should not feel like they have to choose abortion because they don't have the resources to take care of themselves or to take care of their families. And so a lot has to change in order for us to truly be able to have equality in this country and not be targeted because of our lack of resources and who we are.
Ms. Ohden, it's good to see you again. I'm curious, you had shared in your testimony your birth mother's abortion was forced upon her. Have you heard of any other cases where potential birth mothers or women that are talking about a potential abortion had to deal with pressure to get an abortion?
Thank you for your question. It's correct. My biological mother, I now know, was forced to have this abortion. I didn't find that out until about 6 years ago now. My birth mother is now a huge part of my life. She's a great support to me. But I face the reality every day of the fact that not only was my life supposed to end, but this is not something she wanted. And I know that she's not alone in that. There was a study done recently where 48% of women identified being coerced into their abortion. And again, I just want to thank all of the women for being here today. I know we have differing experiences and differing opinions, but I think we're all passionate about wanting to help and serve women. And for me personally, really one of the hardest things is that I receive emails on a regular basis from women who do exist in the shadows, not just other abortion survivors like me, but women who had abortions, regret them, and are living in pain. I have to respond to the emails of women who say, Melissa, can you help me obtain my medical records from my abortion? Can you help me find out if my child is living still today? That's an interesting place for someone like me to be in, but that is what I see in my experiences.
Well, thank you. I'd like to ask Ms. Bennett, you've obviously done a great deal of study. Have you run into others that you have personally talked to that were in situations like Ms. Ohden?
I have other friends who have survived an abortion. My friend Claire Caldwell, she survived an abortion. Unfortunately, the reason that she survived was because the abortion took the life of her twin brother, and the abortion doctor didn't know that there was twins, and so he thought that he had done a successful abortion. And then later on, her mother realized that she was still pregnant, and Claire was inside of her because there was twins, and she was adopted. But when she was born, she had to be put in she was in a body cast, and her hip was dislocated, and she suffered greatly because of that. And there's other abortion survivors. Josiah Presley is another one, and he's missing part of his arm because of the abortion procedure. And like Melissa said, there's others that are in the shadows. It takes a lot of courage to come out and to share a story like that. And so there's many more that we're not privileged to know their stories.
Thank you.
So I'll ask Ms. Ohden, you've made it your life's work to discuss your story. Could you describe more about your efforts and the impact that your life, which could have been cut short, has had on others?
Thank you so much for all of your words and for acknowledging, I think, what the white elephant in this room is, right? All of these people here today had a privilege that I was not given, and that is simply the right to be born and not be born accidentally. And as you can hear in my voice, I get choked up about it. We see this as a political issue, but I have to live with this every single day. And like so many of you on this panel, yes, I'm a mother. My daughters are 11 and almost 5. My oldest daughter was born at the very same hospital where my life was supposed to end. And trust me, I didn't want to do that. I didn't think I could do that. But my children will grow up knowing that they're only alive because an abortion failed to end their mother's life. That is why I do the work that I do, because I don't get to run away from this. I don't get to pretend like maybe this happens to someone else, that this maybe is an issue that doesn't affect me. And I truly believe that if each and every one of you in this room ever lived in my shoes, you would feel very differently about this issue.